Come down onto your back and lie in constructive rest pose to begin. This pose allows us to have our spine in its neutral alignment. So we want to have the knees bent. This does create hip flexion, which we're going to talk about today. But this is a relatively passive amount of hip flexion because it's not like when you lift up your leg that the muscle is actively engaging. So I want you, as you rest down here, to try to soften in the front of the hip crease as much as possible. And the way to do that is allow the pelvis to sink, not trying to adjust the bones in any way, but just allowing yourself to give into gravity. And notice that when you do that, the leg bones just sit in the socket and the upper and lower leg bones support each other so that you actually can have quite a bit of release in the legs. And we're going to keep noticing what's happening in the hips throughout the practice. Notice too that your lower back is in its natural curve. That will vary from person to person, from day to day even perhaps. But there's probably a little space there between your lower back and the floor. Then move up your torso, feel your shoulder blades, let them come out flat and broad on the mat. Relax the shoulders. Check in that your neck is comfortable. You may want to turn it slowly from side to side if it feels tense. If you notice that your chin is jutting up towards the ceiling, place a little pillow or folded towel behind your head to lengthen the back of the neck. Let the back of the head sink into the mat. Relax down the whole length of the arms. Soften. Shoulder blades are broad and wide. Moving our attention back down, feeling that natural lumbar curve with relaxed abdominal muscles. Back muscles as soft as possible. Notice again what's happening in that hip crease. We want the hip flexors as quiet as they can be. And then notice your feet dropping down into the floor. So just to feel the way that the lower back and the hips work together, if you stretch your legs straight out, and now we don't have that crease at the front of the hip, this is called hip extension. If you don't do anything, also at the same time, we got lumbar extension. The curve behind your lower back just got a little bit bigger and the muscles compressed a little. So hip extension and lumbar extension often happen together. So I want you to feel that sensation in the back and then notice what happens as you come back into constructive rest and soften down into that pose. Hopefully that sense of the back muscles being a little bit tighter, contracted, releases when you come to constructive rest. And once again, notice the pelvis dropping down into the floor and soften around the hip crease as much as possible. Now when we start to engage the deep core muscles, we want to have the hip muscles remain relaxed. The hip flexor muscles remain, or as relaxed as you can get them in this passive hip flexion. So you can even place your fingers at the front of the hip crease if you want to monitor that the muscles that flex the hip are as soft as possible. And as we go into the pelvic floor, we don't want to feel them reacting because they're not responsible for supporting the pelvic floor. So in your mind's eye, draw the diamond shape that represents the pelvic floor muscles attaching to the tailbone, each sit bone, and the pubic bone. Keeping the hip flexors soft, take an inhale. And as you exhale, imagine those 4 points coming in as you engage the pelvic floor. This does not require tension at the front of the hip. And then relax and release and soften. This also doesn't require any movement of the bones of the pelvis, so we want to be keeping the pelvis steady. Let's do it again. Inhale and picture the diamond. And then exhale, gather the 4 points in towards the center, the perineum, and then pull the perineum gently towards the crown of the head. And then release and relax. And still no tension in the hip flexors. Release completely. One more time. If you do find tension building there, every time you release, see if you can let it go. Don't let it establish itself. One more time. Inhale, picture the diamond of the pelvic floor. And exhale, gather the 4 points in towards the center, towards the perineum, and lift the perineum towards the crown of the head and squeeze on the sphincters. All of this keeping the hip flexors relaxed. And then soften and release that. Okay, now we're going to bring our attention to the transversus. It reaches around like a big belt. Also does not require the activity of the hip flexors. So picture that big, broad band of support. The muscles are horizontal fibers wrapping all the way around the low torso. And inhale. Exhale and gather those horizontal fibers all the way around. Feel that belt come snug around the lower back and pelvis. And then relax and release. Keep monitoring and softening the hip flexors. Inhale again. Picture the belt. And exhale. Gather that belt around. And then soften and relax. Release completely. And we'll do it one more time. Inhale, prepare. And exhale, gently wrap that belt around. And then release and soften, relax. And let's put the whole inner core together, engaging the pelvic floor and the belt. This is all performed in a neutral spine pelvis alignment with no excess hip flexion added. Inhale, prepare. Exhale, gather the pelvic floor into the center and wrap the belt gently around. And then release and soften. Relax completely. This also doesn't require any tension in the shoulders, neck, or face. So let's do that again. Inhale, prepare. Exhale, pelvic floor, and wrap the belt around. Stay relaxed in the hips and the shoulders, the face, and the feet. And then relax and release. And soften, give into gravity. One more time. Inhale, prepare. And exhale, gather the pelvic floor and wrap the belt. This time, maintain it for a moment. Hold the breath out. And soften and release. We'll bring the arms down close to the sides and use the inner core to stabilize as we begin our arm lifts. Inhale, bring the arms up to vertical. Exhale, engage the inner core to stabilize the pelvis and lower back and reach back. So you shouldn't have any of that feeling of lower back engagement that you got when you straightened your legs out. Inhale, arms float up to the ceiling, and exhale, lower down. Maintaining the neutral spine, the neutral pelvis throughout. Inhale, float the arms up. Exhale, engage the inner core and reach back with the arms, keeping your back still and your pelvis still. And inhale, bring the arms up to the ceiling. And exhale, bring them back down to the sides. One more time. Inhale, arms float up. And exhale, engage the inner core and the transversus. Reach the arms back. Keep your back still, your pelvis steady. Inhale, bring the arms up towards the ceiling. And exhale, lower back down. Soften and release. Give yourself a moment to sink into the floor. If you tend to have tension in the hip flexors, notice them and let that be part of the release. We'll bring the hands behind the head. Open the elbows out wide. Take an inhale. Feel your ribs flare. Exhale, unflare the front ribs in the back and imprint the back ribs down into the mat. This does not mean the lower back is pressing down, just the back ribs. And then release and relax. So we're maintaining the neutral pelvis. Feel your ribs flare. And exhale again. Unflare the front ribs and imprint the back ribs down into the mat, keeping your neutral lower back. We're not tilting the pelvis, please. And then release and relax. Softening the hips as you let your ribs flare. One more time. Exhale. and interlace the front ribs towards each other, imprint the back ribs. Now maintain that and take an inhale. Now add your inner core and take a head lift, continuing to maintain your neutral lower back and lower back down with the inhale. Again, anchor and lift, keeping neutral in the lower back. Inhale, lower down. Keep your ribs and knee together in the front and imprinting the back. One more time. Exhale to lift and inhale to lower and then release. Take your arms up towards the ceiling and make some small circles with your arms in your shoulder sockets. And then reverse. And then bring the arms down to the sides. Now we are going to do some hip flexion. So I'd like you to place your hand in the front of the pelvis with the pinky finger in the hip crease, like a karate chop, with your palm down so you can also feel the hip points. And we're going to engage the inner core and use the obliques to stabilize the pelvis. You will feel those hip flexors working as we lift one leg at a time. Engage your inner core, knit and imprint your ribs, keep the pelvis steady, and lift your right foot up. So notice what's going on in that hip crease. There's some toning up of those muscles now. And lower back down, keep the pelvis steady, and re-anchor. And lift, keeping the pelvis steady, observing in the hip crease, and lower back down. Good, and return to the right leg. Keep steady as you lift the right foot up, and lower back down. Notice the activity. See if you can release it, and then reset the core, and then take the left side, and lower down. And one more time with each leg. There is actually a way to lift the legs without so much hip flexors by concentrating on the psoas, but we're not going to go there today. All right, relax and soften. Release any tension that grew into the hip crease. Relax your arms out to your sides. Re-engage your inner core. Re-engage your knitting and imprinting. And now I'd like you to please tilt your pelvis, drawing your pubic bone into your belly button. So we just flatten the back by doing that. Now we're in lumbar flexion, flattening the back down. Keep that lumbar flexion and straighten your right leg out. This is an odd interaction of activities. The body doesn't usually flex the back and extend the hip together, but you can see it can be done. And then come back, keep the back flat, and relax. And we'll set it up again. Engage the inner core, knit and imprint the ribs, tilt the pelvis, and then keep the back flat as we extend the left leg out. Lumbar flexion, hip extension. And come back in, keeping your lumbar flexion, and then relax. So you may feel, especially if you're tight in your front thighs, that that's a really good stretch for your front thighs. Okay, we're going to do it with both legs ending up straight. Engage the inner core, knit and imprint the ribs, tilt the pelvis. Keep the lower back flat and extend the right leg out. If you can't get all the way out without your back moving, then just stop part way out. Keep flattening the back, keep tilting the pelvis, and extend the left leg out as well. So both legs are straight, both hips extended, lower back flattened down, and then we're going to bend the right leg back in, keep your lower back flat, and then bring the left leg back in, your lower back is still flat, and then release to neutral. Soften. Engage the inner core, knit and imprint, tilt the pelvis. Feel the lumbar pressing down, lumbar flexion, and maintain that as you straighten the left leg out along the floor. And then add the right, keep tilting the pelvis to flatten the lower back. Feel that stretch in the front of the thighs. And we're actually stretching the lower back at the same time. We'll bring the left foot back in, and the right foot back in, and then release and relax. Take a moment, giving into gravity. Notice what's happening at the front of the hips and soften. Now we're going to go into the pistons, and the pistons begins in a deeper flexion than we have now, and then the action of the pistons is actually a hip extension. So let's engage the inner core, find the knit and imprint of the ribs. We're keeping a neutral spine, lift the right foot up, imprint the back ribs, keep steady as you lift the left foot up. We have a 90-degree flexion at the hip here. Re-engage all of that core work, and then we're going to extend the hip. Steady the pelvis and the lower spine and extend the hip. Lower the right foot back or towards the floor, and notice I've got a much more open angle here at the front of the hip. Lift back up and then lower down. Now, naturally, if we don't stabilize well, we're going to go into a lumbar arch and lumbar extension as we do this. But I'd like you to please stabilize the pelvis, keep the neutral pelvis, and do the hip extension separate. So sometimes, functionally, the legs and the lower back often move together, but we can move them separately as these last couple exercises are demonstrating. Neutral spine, hip extension. Keeping those back ribs down and keeping the lower back steady. Let's do one more set. Okay, now let's bring one hand onto each knee and pull the knees in close. Now we're stretching the lower back. There's some lumbar flexion. And since you're holding your knees in with your hands, even though the hips are deeply creased, see if you can relax the muscles at the front of the hip crease. Bring the back a gentle stretch. Now we're going to keep the knees in close here. Engage the inner core. Feel your front ribs knitting, your back ribs imprinting. Pull your pubic bone to your belly button, and without letting your knees move out away from the chest, take the arms straight up towards the ceiling. Drop the shoulders down, keep your shoulders still, and we're going to make a circle. Let your knees tilt over to one side. Your hips can move, but keep your back ribs down and circle away. The knees come away from you. And then over to the other side. Keep your shoulders steady and your back ribs down. Complete the circle. Come in close in the center, and then reverse the circle. Roll the other direction. Keep the shoulders down and steady. The back ribs reaching towards the mat as you circle the pelvis. So all the movement happens below the waist. And then let's reverse again. Roll out in a big circle. Keep the back ribs down. Come into the center. Scoop into the center. And then reverse. Back ribs stay down. Back shoulders stay down. Back into the center. One more time with each direction. And then place one hand on each knee and gently pull the knees in close. Now, depending on your body, your hip flexors may really react to that or maybe not. So let's try to soften them now. When we do the hip circles or the stirring the coffee exercise, we flop the legs out. The intention here is to give those hip flexors a break because you make the legs so passive. So the knees are flopping out away from each other, and then you stir your thigh bones around the socket, keeping it as loose in the hip socket as possible, stirring the femurs. And then reverse. Going to be as easy as you can. You're using your hands and arms to power the movement. If I do nothing, my legs are just staying right here wide. That's how floppy we want to have them. Okay, bring the knees back into the chest. Lengthen the lower back, the back of the neck. Okay, we're going to move into the 100. Now, if you have very tight hip flexors and it bothers you to hold the legs straight out, you can bend them. That will alleviate that discomfort. Or you can even have the feet on the floor. In no case do we want to feel strain or pain in the lower back when doing these abdominal exercises. So please feel free to have the feet down if that serves you better. Wherever you put the feet, we're going to have a neutral spine. So if your feet are still off the mat, you're just going to move your thighs out a little bit until you can find your neutral lumbar curve. Arms down at the sides. Lift your feet up as high as your knees. Engage the inner core, knit and imprint, and press the hands down. Lift the head up. Now you can stay right here or extend the legs out. And then as you exhale, pulse your arms 5 times at your sides. And then 5 pulses for your inhale. Exhale for 5. And inhale. Exhale. Inhale for 5. Exhale. And inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. And inhale. One more time. Exhale. And inhale. Good. Then bring the knees into the chest. Hug the knees in. Roll your head slowly from one side to the other. Let's put one foot down and then the other. Take a moment in the neutral. Now we're going to straighten both legs out and go ahead and allow the lumbar to take its increased curve. And we're going to reach the arms up and back towards the floor behind you, and you'll notice that that arches the back even more away from the floor. We're going to stay here, taking that big stretch, flex the feet back and reach out through the ball of the foot, then point the toes, then pull the toes back and flex the whole foot back. And reach out through the ball of the foot and point the toes, pull the toes back and then flex the whole foot back. Again, reach out through the ball of the foot, point the toes, flex the toes back and then the whole foot back, and then squeeze the toes and open the toes. Squeeze and fan the toes open. Squeeze the toes tight, fan them open. One more time, squeeze and fan. Relax the feet. Relax for a moment the whole body, softening towards the floor. Then let's float the arms to the ceiling and notice how that adjusts the spine. And then bend the knees and notice once again, spine is adjusted back into its neutral position. Okay, let's bring the right knee into the chest. You can feel your lower back flatten, your pelvis is tilting, and then straighten the left leg out onto the mat. So again, here we have lumbar flexion, flat back, and hip extension, straight out down the front of the left leg. Feel the 2 different types of stretches the 2 sides of the body are getting. And now we're going to go into the hip circles using a neutral spine. So that means you're just going to back off of the stretch a little bit. Move your right knee a bit away from the chest until you can feel your tailbone down. You're back into having that little lumbar curve space. Engage your inner core, knit and imprint your ribs, and then extend the right leg up to the ceiling. Reach up tall, long through the right leg. Bring your hands down onto the hip points, and then circle your right leg around 5 times. Go very slowly and make the range of motion such that you can stabilize the pelvis. For real. Really make it still. 5 one way and then stop and reverse. Make sure that your ribs are knitting. You might want to pay special attention to your right ribs going to your left back pocket. Then let's bend the right knee. Place your left hand on the right knee. Relax the right arm to the side. And pull your knee over towards the floor on the left. You can have the right arm wherever it's comfortable. And then go onto the back and bring both knees into the chest. Feel the lower back flatten. Again, since you're using your hands on your legs, see if you can soften the effort in the front of the thighs. Now place the right foot down on the floor and pull the left knee into the breastbone. Notice that your lower back is going flat, and keep it flat as you straighten the right leg out. And take a moment, feel the dynamic of the stretch on this side. It may feel very different from side to side. And then back off of the stretch by releasing the left knee out away from the chest until you feel your neutral spine. Engage your inner core, knit and imprint the ribs, and then extend the left leg straight up to the ceiling. Check back in with the core, feel the pelvis, and circle the leg 5 times in one direction without allowing the pelvis to rock or the ribs to move away from the mat. Still in our neutral, but the back ribs are imprinted. 5 times one way, reset, and then go 5 in the other. Then we bend the left knee and with the right hand, pull the knee towards the floor. Adjust your left arm wherever your left shoulder is comfortable. And take a couple slow breaths there. Then return to the back and bring both knees into the chest. And place the feet on the floor, feel your neutral. Now we're going to use a small ball or a folded towel or pillow or blanket between the knees. And we're going to work with pelvic lifting, which we can do either in a neutral spine by accentuating the movement in the hips, or with a flattened back by accentuating the movement of the vertebra relative to each other. So we're going to feel both of those possibilities. So use something between the knees. You could also use a full roll of toilet paper, and you put the cardboard of each side of that roll into the inner knees. So we're in our neutral spine. We'll engage the inner core, knit and imprint the ribs, so we're very steady in the torso, and then keep the pelvis steady as you squeeze the knees into the ball, and then release the squeeze. No movement in the pelvis. Exhale and squeeze into the ball, and then release the squeeze. Working the inner thighs, working the core, keeping the pelvis still. Exhaling to squeeze and inhaling to release the squeeze. One more time. Good. Take a moment and relax. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing with lumbar flexion. So we'll start with the inner core, knit and imprint the ribs, and then tilt the pelvis so that your lower back goes flat down onto the floor. Now maintain the flattened lower back and squeeze into the ball, and release the squeeze, but keep the lower back flat. Again, in lumbar flexion, squeeze on the ball, and then release the squeeze. Keep the lower back flat, the pelvis stays tilted. Press in on your exhale, Release on your inhale and maintain the position of the pelvis. One more time. And then release and relax that. If you have some support behind your head, take it out as we're going to do pelvic lifts. The reason we don't want the head lifted is because it's just too much flexion when you get the lower back lifted, when the pelvis is lifted, and if your neck is also in cervical flexion, it's just too much flexion. So we want the head down so we don't over flex the neck. We're going to do the pelvic lift both with the tilted pelvis and with the neutral pelvis. And we'll begin with the tilted pelvis. Engage the inner core, knit and imprint the ribs, tilt the pelvis, go to a flat back, squeeze the ball. Now we're going to keep that tilted pelvis, press into the feet and raise the hips up. Good, so we're rolling one vertebra at a time, but I want you to concentrate today on pulling the pubic bone and the belly button together. There we have hip extension and lumbar flexion again. And roll down, keep your pelvis tilted. I want you to please come down into a flat back, keeping the pelvis tilted. And then release the tilt of the pelvis, then the squeeze on the ball, then the core muscles relax. Now we're going to take a look at doing that same pelvic lift with a neutral spine. So now the movement happens entirely in that hip crease. You can even put your hands here if you want to bring your attention here. We're not rolling through the spine. We're stabilizing the spine and then just using the hip extensors to lift the pelvis. Start with the inner core, then knit and imprint. Keep the pelvis steady as you squeeze into the ball. Now continue to keep the pelvis steady. Press into the feet and lift up. It's going to feel different. We're not rolling. We're keeping the neutral. So it's a bit hard to tell in your neutral here, but you can actually observe the neutral spine. Now to come down, put your hands in that hip crease, and as you lower, just soften into the hip crease so that when your tailbone sits down, the whole spine is returned to its original position in constructive rest. There's no readjustment. We can just release the pelvis, and there's no readjustment into neutral because we've maintained it. All right, let's alternate with a rolling pelvic lift again. Engage the inner core, knit and imprint. Tilt the pelvis, squeeze the ball, and press into the feet. Keeping the pelvis tilted, lift yourself up one vertebra at a time. Keep drawing the pubic bone to the belly button, and then roll down. Keep drawing the pubic bone to the belly button. Feel your belly button scooping into your spine. Come to a flat back. Keep the back flat for a moment just so you can check that you did that. And then release and relax. Let it all go. And once again, we're going to go to neutral. Engage the inner core, knit and imprint. Squeeze. Stay neutral. And lift your whole spine up off of the mat in one piece. And lower down by deepening into the hip crease, just dropping the hips down, returning directly to neutral, release and relax, soften completely. One more of each of those. Engage the inner core, knit and imprint, tilt the pelvis, squeeze on the ball, and roll up, keeping the belly button scooping into the spine, one vertebra at a time. And roll it back down, belly button into spine, pulling through your whole lower back. Come to a flat back position, pull the pubic bone into the belly button, and release into neutral. Relax the squeeze on the ball, relax the core work. And one more time. Neutral spine, engage the inner core, knit and imprint, squeeze the ball, stay neutral and hinge up into a pelvic lift. Hinging at the hip crease to raise the pelvis, and hinge in the hip crease to lower the pelvis. And then relax. All right, we're done with the pelvic lifts. Re-engage the inner core, knit and imprint. Tilt the pelvis, flat back, then lift your head, and grab a hold of the ball. Keep your back flat as you lower down. take the ball in your hands above your breastbone and then release to neutral. Soften the shoulders. Re-engage your inner core. Knit and imprint your ribs. Tilt the pelvis. Straighten one leg out. Keep tilting the pelvis. Straighten the other leg out. Keep tilting the pelvis. Take your arms back behind you, preparing for the roll up. Take an inhale. Scoop the belly in and use your inhale to roll up. Think of your breastbone following the ball as you roll through the spine. Now I want you to please sit up tall for a moment. You may need to bend your knees depending on how tight your hamstrings are, but get your sit bones down. Here's your neutral spine. Keep your shoulders relaxed. We're going to scoop the belly in and then think of lumbar flexion to move forward. Instead of a lot of upper back rounding, trying to get that feeling of length between the tailbone and the low ribs. And once you've got that sense of lengthening in the lower back, then relax the neck and shoulders. You can go a little deeper into this twist, the stretch, but keep your shoulders relaxed and resist humping the upper back. We don't need more stretch there most times, but we do want that length in the lower back. And then we'll hold the ball in the breastbone and sit tall again. Engage the inner core. Knit the ribs around, scoop the belly, and roll down. And take it one vertebra at a time down to the floor as well as you can do that. See if you can at least get the lower back and the back of the sacrum and the lower back down. And then release. Stretch the arms long behind you. Lengthen. Relax the belly for a moment. We're going into that big, long arch of the spine. This is a spinal extension here. And then we're going to change it to spinal flexion, or lumbar flexion, I should say. Scooping the belly. Drawing the belly button in, knitting the ribs, imprinting them. And then use your inhale to roll up. As slowly and specifically through the spine as you can manage. And then we're going to sit tall, find the neutral spine, relax the shoulders, draw the belly button in, and lengthen between your sacrum and your lower ribs. And once you've got that length in the lower back, relax your neck and shoulders, hang the head down. Again, we want to feel the stretch in the low back and the backs of the legs, but not a lot of overstretch in the upper back. Then sit tall. Hold the ball up in front of the breastbone. Again, relax the shoulders. Re-engage the low core muscles. Find the wrapping of the ribs. Scoop the belly in and roll down. So try to roll down through the sacrum first of all. And then feeling the lower back hitting down one vertebra at a time, rolling through the length of the spine as best you can. Once you're all the way down, you can reach back with the arms and stretch. We're going to do it one more time. Set the low core, knit and imprint the ribs, scoop the belly in. Take the ball up in front of the breastbone and roll yourself up on your inhale. And at the top, we sit tall, reaching the sit bones down, and then draw the belly button back towards the spine. Find that length between the sacrum and the back ribs, and then relax into the forward bend. And then sit yourself tall, floating the ball in front of the breastbone, engage the inner core, wrap the ribs around, scoop the belly in, take it down slowly. Feel the sacrum hitting down, and then one vertebra at a time through the lower back. Continuing to go vertebra by vertebra through the length of the spine, and reaching the arms up long. Feeling that big extension of the whole spine, lengthening. and float the ball, arms up to the ceiling, feeling the ball above the breastbone, bend the knees, and then put the ball down and relax into neutral for a moment. And just notice how you're doing in those hip creases and in the lower back. Okay, we're going to go to the stomach. So life in this world often puts us in some version of this. Hip flexion, lumbar or spinal flexion, especially upper back spinal flexion. So when we lie on our stomach, we get the front of the legs long and we have the opportunity to open up the chest and reverse the action that life and gravity tends to impose on us. Stretch out long on the belly. Place your hands underneath your forehead. And take a moment to completely relax here. So we got a nice long line down the whole front of the body. You may feel a little bit of compression in the lower back. Notice the feeling across the chest. And at the back of the neck, if you put your forehead down, you're not going to feel your lower back compressed, but you should feel length at the back of the neck. Now extend the arms straight out in front of you. Place the forehead on the mat. And if you were feeling some compression in your lower back, probably that diminishes now because you don't have that little spinal extension that was happening. Okay, we're going to keep the forehead down on the floor if possible. If this is difficult, you can take a very small towel and put it underneath your forehead. I'd like you to place your hands directly underneath your hip points. So the hip point is going to be pressing down into the center of each palm. And we're going to practice some pure hip extension without added lumbar extension. So we're going to engage the inner core, feel that belt, and really imagine it like hip hugger pants going across those hip points, keeping the weight completely evenly distributed from hip to hip. We're going to gather the ribs together, keep your belt snugging, and then sneak the right foot up off of the floor. This is a very small motion. If you lift way too high, then your hip will come off of your hand. But if you don't stabilize enough, you're going to feel your hip press into your hand. And we want to have neither of those things happen. So you're just unweighting the leg a little bit and lower it back down. Try to keep the pelvis really well supported with those inner core muscles. And then switch to the left side. Try to keep the weight even across the front of the pelvis. Thinking of that belt being really snug is going to be crucial here. Relax and release. Even weight into each palm. Stabilize, wrap the belt around. And then float the right foot up off the floor, keeping the knee straight. Your thigh may or may not lift off of the mat, but it's still extending at the front of the hip. And lower down, release. Steady at the front of the pelvis again. It may help to think of reaching your left toes away from your head as you do this motion. Remember, you don't want to lose your contact with the left hip, but neither do you want to push into it. And then release and relax. One more time. Find the inner core, balance across the front of the pelvis, and sneak the right foot and leg up off of the mat. So you're using your hip extensors muscles, which are the buttocks and the muscles of the back of the thigh, and lower down, release. Last one, inner core, and sneak the left foot up off of the mat, nice and long down the whole left front leg, and then release and relax. Okay, bring your arms straight out in front of you. Actually, let's turn the head to the side with the arms bent at the sides for a moment just to relax the neck. Turn your head the other direction. And feel yourself in the center of the pelvis. You want to be resting on the pubic bone in the center of the pelvis. And then extend extend your arms way out in front of you with the forehead down on the mat. And again, you can still use a tiny little towel roll underneath your forehead if you need to. So same preparation. Let's get the inner core working, staying balanced around the pelvis. Knit the front ribs together, then gently press your palms down into the floor. Keep your elbows down and raise your chest and head. And see if you can keep the legs passive as you lift up here. So we're getting upper back thoracic extension here, but trying not to compress the lower back and lower back down. And relax and release. We're trying to accentuate what's happening at the upper part of the spine rather than using the hip extensors or the lumbar extensors. Engage the inner core. Knit your ribs together. Press your palms down. Keep your elbows on the mat and raise your chest and head up. Legs and buttocks are passive. We have the inner core wrapping around. Keep looking at the floor so the back of the neck is long. And really feel the sensation in the upper back. And then lower down. And release. Soften. One more time. Find the inner core, knit the ribs. Keep the buttocks, the legs relaxed. Press the palms down. Keep the elbows down. And raise the chest and the head. And feel the length down the front of the thighs. The opening in the chest with as little compression in the lower back as possible. And then lower and release. Now, let's come up into Sphinx. Bring your elbows down underneath your shoulders. If you do nothing, you're going to feel your lower back compressed, your shoulders compressed, and your back of your neck compressed. So I want to adjust this position by engaging the inner core, pressing down into the elbows and forearms, pulling the pubic bone to the belly button, and then at the same time lifting the sternum away from the navel. Interesting complex of movements. Tilt the chin down slightly. We're going to do the single leg kick. So we just stabilize this position of the torso, bend one knee at a time and do kick, kick. And then the other leg and do kick, kick. Kick, kick. And kick, kick. Keep the shoulders drawing down the back, the breastbone open, the pubic bone pulling towards the navel so your pelvis is steady. We have a little bit of, that action is going to help you decompress the lower back. So we can have the upper back working, the chest opening, the front thighs stretching without the lower back being compressed. Okay, let's go back into a child's pose. Bring your hips back to your heels. Place your arms wherever they're comfortable. You might want to place them under your forehead or stretch them out in front of you. Knees can go wide if that's helpful. Give your lower back what feels like a good stretch. Okay, and stand up tall on the knees. If this is tough on your knees, just fold the mat over so you have an extra layer of pad. If it's tricky on your balance, then get near a chair or something that you can touch with your hand. So as we stand here to begin, we're in our neutral lumbar curve. We're going to take the right foot forward, so we're just standing on the left knee. Try to align the ankle and the knee of the right side. Don't have the knee going forward of the ankle. And steady yourself in the center. Feel a plumb line from the very crown of your head down through the middle of the pelvic floor. Then we're going to engage the inner core, knit the ribs around, and then tuck the pelvis. And I'd like you to notice what you feel in your front left thigh. That tucking of the pelvis here is giving you hip extension, stretching the front of the thigh. And then relax and release. So the same thing again, inner core, knit the ribs, and then tilt the pelvis, pull your tail between your legs. This also gives you lumbar extension, lumbar flexion, but I imagine you're going to feel the most sensation in the front of the thigh. And then relax and release. Do it one more time. Inner core, knit the ribs. And tuck the tail between the legs. Lengthen the front thigh. Notice that this is not a classic lunge. We didn't move our weight forward at all. This is really specific stretch for those front thighs. And then release. And stand back onto the right side. Take a moment, adjust here. And then we'll bring the left foot forward. So the left foot's underneath the left knee. Plumb line from the crown of the head down through the center line of the body. Engage the inner core, knit the ribs, and then tilt the pelvis. Pull your tail between your legs and feel the stretch in the front of the right thigh. And release. Now, if one of those sides is much more intense than the other, that gives you some information. Tuck, engage, and then tuck. So the hip flexors, of course, would be more tight on the side where the sensation is more intense. And then release and relax, which probably indicates that the pelvis is out of alignment, which is very common. Okay, once more, inner core, knit the ribs, tilt the pelvis. And release, and come back onto the left knee. Move back into child's pose for a moment. Okay, we're going to turn onto the left side and do the clamshells first. So sometimes you hear me say, referring to the degree of flexion in the hips as we do these. So we're starting at 90-degree flexion today. 90-degree angle at the hip, 90-degree angle at the knee. We're going to engage the inner core, wrap the belt around, and roll the leg out in the socket. Let's just do 5 here with the 90-degree hip flexion. And then relax. Now we open out to 45-degree flexion, so halfway between 90 degrees and having the legs straight out. This is called 45-degree hip flexion. Roll your right hip forward, engage your inner core, and roll the leg out in the socket. Get that right hip forward. And then relax and release. So in those two cases, we were using the external rotators that make up some of the buttock. Now we're going to go to 0-degree hip flexion or hip extension. And now you're going to feel the hip extensors working too. So it's going to be more intense in the buttock. It's because there are a whole other set of muscles engaged here. Engage the inner core and roll the thigh out. We're still using the external rotators, of course, but we're also using the hip extensors. Now let's go all the way out to straight legs. Continue to keep the right hip a little tilted forward if you can. You may want your fingertips on the floor. Don't put your whole palm, but rather the fingertips. It's better on your wrist and better for your shoulder. Engage your inner core, and then we'll lift the internal organs up off of the mat and raise both legs up. And we're going to work with the feet. Flex the back and then squeeze the toes. Point the feet. Fan the toes out and then flex the whole foot back. Squeeze the toes, point the feet, fan the toes, flex back with the whole foot. Squeeze, point, fan, and flex. Keep the toes open, reach out with the balls of the feet. Point the toes and squeeze as you pull back. Open, reach out through the balls of the feet, squeeze and come back in. One more time. Open the toes and reach, squeeze and come back. Relax the feet. Lower the legs down, and then we're going to switch over to the right side and begin in 90-degree hip flexion on the right side. So we have the knees and feet at the front of the mat. 90-degree angle at the hip and at the knee. Relax the neck and shoulders. Bring that left hip forward slightly, engage the inner core, and then roll the leg out in the socket. Just 5 rotations. If you do them really well, even a small number of repetitions is effective. Relax. And then let's open the front of the hips, 45-degree hip flexion. Keep the left hip forward. Engage the inner core and roll out in the socket here. And relax. And then open the front of the hips out. 0-degree hip flexion. Stabilize your pelvis and roll the leg out in the socket. And relax, straighten both legs out. Engage your inner core. Take your organ lift, raise both legs up, and flex the feet back. Squeeze the toes, point the feet, fan the toes, and flex back. Squeeze, point, fan, and flex. Squeeze, point, fan, and flex with the toes open. Reach out, squeeze the toes, and pull back. Open the toes and reach out, squeeze the toes, and come back one more time. And relax the feet, lower the legs. And let's turn onto the back. Finding that neutral spine position, relax completely. Okay, we're going to find inner core support around neutral, knit and imprint, lift one foot up and then the other foot up. We're going to go into the single straight leg stretch. Here we have hip extension and hip flexion happening in the same exercise while we stabilize the pelvis. We're going to keep your inner core stabilizing the lower back and pelvis, knit and imprint your ribs. Lift your head up, extend one leg straight up and the other leg straight out. Hip extension, hip flexion, and then switch. Good. Feel your lower back staying steady. Feel the length down the front of one leg and the length up the back of the other leg. Now bring both legs straight up and take your hands behind your head. We're going to keep the lower back stable as we lower both legs down a little bit, going into hips and hip extension, but no lumbar extension. Come back up, bring the legs up high, flexing at the front of the hips, but no lumbar flexion. Neutral pelvis, lower the legs down, extend the front of the hip. Keep your pelvis still as you lift the legs up, and stretch the back of the hip. One more time, lower down, and back up. And then bend the knees, lower your head, rock your knees from side to side. And bring your feet down onto the floor. If you have a support behind your head, please take it out. We're going to inhale and reach both arms up and back. Engage the inner core. Find the knitting and imprinting in the ribs. Tilt the pelvis so your back is flat, and then raise the hips up off of the mat. Got a nice long opening up the whole front of the body. Lengthen the back of the neck. Keep your arms back where they are and roll back down through the spine. Lengthening between each vertebra. Settling down. And relaxing into neutral. And bring your arms back down to the sides. Feel your neutral rest position. And again, we stretch the arms up and back. Let them rest on the floor behind you. You might need to bend your elbows in order to do that. That's okay. Engage the inner core. Knit and imprint the ribs. Tilt the pelvis. And roll yourself up. Lengthen the front thigh, open in the chest, lengthen the back of the neck, and roll back down. Imprint the back ribs, scoop the belly in, roll through the lower spine, feel the stretch along the sides up into the armpit. Release the pelvis to neutral, then lower the arms down to the sides. One more time. Stretch the arms up and notice, I'm not asking you to engage yet, so you're going to feel some movement in your ribs as you bring the arms up, and your lower back's going to feel extended. And then we're going to engage the inner core, knit and imprint, and tilt the pelvis, and roll the hips up off of the mat. And bring the hips back down, imprint the ribs, scoop the belly in, roll through the lower spine, and release. Float the arms up to vertical. Pause. Relax the humeral heads down into the sockets. And bring the knees into the chest and rock side to side. And then lower the feet to the floor. Relax the arms out comfortably wide, palms up. Returning to constructive rest pose. Feeling your feet against the floor, the back of the pelvis. Notice the natural lumbar curve. Feel the length of the spine, softening towards the mat, relaxing the shoulders broad, arms relaxed. Soften in the neck and throat and face. And then just notice how the front of the hips are doing. Feel a lot of hip flexion, or sorry, hip extension today. So just feel the effects of that. All right, that's where we're going to leave it. I'm going to be traveling next weekend, and I'm not sure about whether I'll be able to give the class or not. I will if I can. If I'm not, of course, there's a whole library of past classes. And then there may be some weeks when I can't do Saturdays, when I may do a live class on Friday morning. I'll post that info so you could do it live with me on Friday, or of course you could do the recording on Saturday. But I will try most weeks at least to have a new class up, even if I can't do it live. Stay tuned regarding the hall. After I sent you that email, I was told that the guidelines for yoga studios require mask use by everybody the whole time, so it looks like we're probably not going back, but we'll keep an eye on the guidelines. All right, let me know if you're here taking the class today, or even if you take it later, let me know. And I will be seeing you, I'll try next week, and then probably some Fridays instead of Saturdays during the summer. All right.